Well, good morning to you all. This morning we returned to our series, which was broken by a short break for Holy Week, the series on the names of God. And this morning's name, I think most of you will know, Yahweh-Rohi. You may not know the Hebrew for the name, but I am fairly certain that all of you, even if today is your first time stepping inside a church building, will have heard or know what this name means. The name first appears in the 23rd Psalm, which of course is one of the most well-known and most well-loved of all of the Psalms. We sing this psalm frequently. People carry it around in their handbags or in their wallets on little cards. It appears in frequent books. We find it on wall hangings and pictures, tea towels, mugs, pens, even t-shirts. It has been a source of comfort for many. It is probably the most frequently requested psalm at funerals, and it is probably the most frequently recited psalm at hospital bedsides. It has been a source of comfort to many, to those who are grieving, although that was not really why it was originally written, but also to those who are just struggling through life, whatever their circumstances might be. Its metaphor, that of the shepherd and the sheep, is one that has endured. And I think even today, whilst very few of us have any real experience of sheep and probably less experience of being a shepherd, I think most of us get the general idea about what this metaphor is meant to be telling us. And even for the children who are today, some of them in here with us for the service, I think you'll have no trouble understanding today's message. It's very simple. To fully understand the metaphor, or the name, we need to fully understand the metaphor. And so that is where we're going to focus most of our time today, just refreshing what exactly this metaphor is trying to teach us about our relationship and the way that we relate to God as Yahweh-Rohi, our shepherd. Well, for us, sheep as we know them today live in fenced paddocks on farms. There's a farmer who owns the sheep, and he or she is responsible to prepare the pasture, to feed the sheep, and to build the fences to keep them in one place and to keep the predators out of that place. The farmer ensures that the sheep have adequate water. They provide extra feed when extra feed is needed, particularly in our summers and in times of drought. The farmer organises the shearing and takes care of all of the health needs of the sheep, the drenching and all of that type of thing, and of course the reproductive needs of the sheep. And so farmers are very busy, particularly around lambing time, checking up on all of the sheep that are giving birth and the new mums, and making sure that all of the lambs are kept safe as well. Farmers, of course, also have to organise the shearing for their sheep. But the farmer lives in a house with his or her family, and the sheep today live in a paddock with the flock. If their source of water runs dry, which could be likely in Australia's dry, hot summers, those sheep are in trouble. And if a predator happens to make its way over or under or through some of the fencing, then those sheep are going to be run ragged around that paddock. Some of them will stumble and fall and break legs, some of them will be injured, and some of them will end up dead. And I think that even city dwellers, as we are, can understand that sheep are fairly helpless on their own against predators. But even in the absence of predators, sheep can also be quite helpless. Sorry there. I think some of you have heard me share before my experience with sheep, which is fairly limited. I spent about 20 years working in agricultural science, but my speciality was in horticulture, not in livestock. And so I spent many long days out on farms, but I was there primarily for the horticultural side of the enterprise. But many of these farms were mixed enterprise, and so to get to where we needed to go, where the vegetable crops were, we would often have to go through paddocks of sheep or cattle to get there. And I can recall on one occasion, the group of us that were there were most concerned because there were a number of sheep that were upside down in the paddock. They were lying on their back with their feet in the air. And of course your mind, if you're not familiar with livestock, your mind goes to the worst possible scenario, and we were fairly convinced that they'd been struck down by some weird kind of paralysis disease or a tick or something. And so we called the farmer, who just laughed and said, "You're in some pretty good pasture up there." The sheep were fat because they were on good pasture, and fat sheep sometimes have trouble staying upright. They lie down for a rest, they fall into an indent or they roll over, they end up on their back, and a sheep's back is quite flat. And once they get in that position, they are helpless to get up by themselves. And it's actually quite a dangerous situation for a sheep to be in, because the gases continue to build up in the sheep's rumen or stomach, and it puts pressure on their vital organs. And so if they're not tipped the right way up, they will die due to the pressure that is put on their organs. So the farmer just simply instructed us how to flip them over and to watch them for a while, because you can imagine if you're on your back and you've got your legs in the air for quite a while and then you're suddenly flipped over, you're going to be fairly wobbly on your legs. And so there were a few that we had to flip a few times until they were right. So even in the absence of predators, a farmer needs to regularly check up on the flock and take care of their sheep, because on their own, even in the absence of predators, they can be quite helpless. Even a sheep with a heavy wool fleece, if it gets wet, can get stuck in this sort of situation as well. But life for an ancient shepherd, and in many parts of the world for shepherds still today, was quite a different situation. And the main difference was, of course, that ancient shepherds were with the flock all the time, 24/7. They didn't come and go check in on the sheep. They were with them continuously. And so they got to know the sheep and they understood the sheep's needs. And as Yahweh-Rohi, the Lord our shepherd, he dwells, he abides with us continuously. And he knows each one and gets to know each of the sheep within the flock. When I was doing my degree in agricultural science, as part of that course, our year level would have to go out for a term or a semester, I can't remember for how long it was, once a week to the university farm. And there we would have to bring all the sheep in and we would have to run them through the races so that we could do all of the different assessments that we needed to do on them with weight and height and taking fleece samples and fat scoring and all of that sort of thing. It changed the way that I looked at sheep. Previously, if I looked out on a flock of sheep, they just all looked like white clouds, all kind of acting in the same way and doing the same thing. But when you actually have to work with them and see them week after week, you get to know their little individual characteristics. You know which ones are the scaredy sheep. You know which ones are the more bold sheep. You know the ones that like to run in the pack and won't be separated on their own. You know which ones are the flighty ones. And you know which ones are the unpredictable ones that may jump on you when they come out of those races if you're standing in the wrong spot. And you know, it didn't matter how mixed up those sheep would get in the paddocks. When we brought them in, they had a way of pretty much going through those races in the same order, week after week after week. There would be a first group that would come through, and then there were a bigger group, which was, in our case, crossbred sheep, quite big sheep. And then there were the stragglers who would come through at the back. And there might be some differences, small differences in the order in each of those groups, but by and large, they managed to sort themselves out and come through in the same order, week after week. And that is what getting to know and spending time with the sheep does for you. You get to know the individual quirks and personalities of the sheep within the flock. You get to know them as individuals. You know, Eastern shepherds would give names to their sheep. Each one was known by an individual name, and I can vouch for the fact that dairy farmers often do the same as well. They know their cows, they know which one is a good leader to bring the others in. They know which one needs encouragement, and they know their individual personalities. So when we say that the Lord is our shepherd, it's that kind of intimacy that we are talking about. A one-on-one knowing of the individual person. God knows us not just as one of many, but as an individual. Not only did the shepherds know the sheep, but the sheep also knew the shepherd. And they could distinguish their own shepherd's voice, even when they were part of a massive flock with multiple shepherds. If their particular shepherd called out to them, they would come. And this is illustrated for us in a book from the 1800s called The Giant Cities of Bashan. It was written by Reverend Porter. And he describes how he was out on the hillside with a group of others, and they were looking down at the walls of the city. And out through the city gates came the shepherds with their sheep. And there were thousands of these sheep coming out. And the shepherds all sort of stood together in a bunch until all of the sheep had come out through the gates of the city. And then this is what he says. Then they separated, each shepherd taking a different path and uttering as he advanced a shrill, peculiar call. The sheep heard them. At first the masses swayed and moved as if shaken by some internal convulsion, and then points struck out in the directions taken by the shepherds. And these became longer and longer until the confused masses were resolving into long, living streams, flowing after their leaders. And I think that's just what Jesus meant when he said, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. That's what this name describes, that intimacy of knowing God and being known by him. It is unlike any other name that we have so far discussed. Now, when as second or third year agriculture students we went out to this farm, our first job was, of course, to bring the sheep in. Now, there were no sheep dogs and there were no quad bikes, or at least none that we were allowed to use. And so we would pick up whatever was lying around, old bits of plastic pipe. We'd break branches off the bushes, and we'd head out and get behind these sheep and generally make a lot of noise. And there'd be a lot of running around, there'd be a lot of bashing of pipes on the ground. And eventually we'd get those sheep into a group and head them in the right direction. The sheep moved forward because they were terrified of us. A bunch of 20-year-olds out making a lot of noise and bashing things on the ground behind them. They moved forward out of fear. And that is exactly the opposite of what this image of a shepherd and a sheep speaks to us about. The shepherd is not a frightening stranger to the sheep. The sheep know the shepherd. The sheep trust that the shepherd has their best interests at heart. They are used to the shepherd taking them to where there is food. And so there's no problem getting the sheep to move in the direction that the shepherd wants them to go. He or she simply walks and the sheep follow because they have nothing at all to fear from the shepherd. In biblical times, the sheep would graze out on the hillside in the wilderness. There were no barbed wire fences keeping them in. They roamed free. There was no one busy sowing good pasture for them and putting down fertiliser to make sure that a rich and lush pasture was grown for them. And so when we read in the 23rd Psalm about green pastures, we have in our minds a lush, thick kind of pasture that you might find in Victoria or maybe in New Zealand. That's probably not what the psalmist had in mind. In Israel, the rainfall in these wilderness areas was quite low. But the west wind carried with it humidity. And that west wind would hit the hillsides, and in the coolness of the night, the humidity would condense out of the air, forming like a layer of dew. And that, together with the meagre rainfall that they had in those areas, was sufficient for some little shoots of grass to come up between the rocks. It wasn't enough for the flock to stay in one place for any extended period of time. But it was enough to meet the needs of the flock for that day. And they would feed on the little sprigs of grass and graze it all off, and then the shepherd would move them on somewhere else for the next day to allow that area to recover and to find new food for them. It was also the job of the shepherd to know where good sources of water could be found. Quiet pools of water where the sheep would be safe to drink. And if the conditions were more settled, then perhaps they would dig a well to supply the needs of the water for the sheep. But the shepherd also needed to be aware of the potential for flooding, because in the desert wilderness, floods could happen very quickly and without warning. They have these sort of dry riverbeds that are known as wadis, and when it rains up in the mountain regions, the rain will come down in such huge amounts that the mountain soil is not able to soak it all up. And so it runs off and it ends up coming down these wadis in like a wall of water. So you can be out grazing your sheep, the sun's in the sky, there's not a cloud in sight, there hasn't been any rain for maybe months, but all of a sudden you'll be hit by this flood coming down these riverbeds. And so it was the job of the shepherd to know when it was safe for the sheep to cross one of these dry riverbeds and when they needed to stay away. And it was the job of the shepherd to know where the quiet pools of water were to lead the sheep to drink. The sheep were completely dependent on the shepherd to provide their food and their water for them in this way. And so the sheep came to trust the shepherd, that the shepherd would do that for them without fail. Now, another thing about sheep is that they are on their own quite defenceless. They're pretty much a predator's dream. They don't have sharp teeth or sharp claws. They don't have any venom or sting. They can't run very fast. They can't fly away. They can't dig a burrow and hide. And they don't have any special tricks up their sleeve, like they're not able to drop their tail and run off to fool a predator. They're pretty much an all-you-can-eat buffet for predators. And they also like to hang around in flocks, which makes them even more attractive to predators. Now today, when we talk about predators, mostly it's wild dogs that we're talking about. And farmers must manage the predators by trying to control the wild dog numbers, but also by putting up strong fences, using barbed wire and that type of thing. And sometimes, even in Australia, you will see farmers using what we call herd guards. So in Australia, alpacas are the most common that are used as herd guards, but you can also use donkeys, and in many countries, dogs are used, specially bred dogs, which will stay with the flock and will protect the flock against any kind of predators. Sheep need protection from their predators. In ancient times, it was the shepherd who would provide that protection. The shepherd would use a sling and take some stones and would use that sling to ward off approaching predators, or would use their rod. Now the rod was a bit more like a sturdy club, really, and they could use that against predators when they would attack the sheep. At night, the shepherd would bring the sheep into what they called a sheepfold. It could be built of stones like this, or more commonly it was a bit more makeshift than that, probably made out of cut branches and bushes, thorn bushes, prickle bushes, anything you could find that would keep predators out. And the shepherd would lie in the opening of that sheepfold, putting himself between the sheep and the danger of predators. And within that sheepfold, the sheep could rest calmly. They could fear no evil because they knew that their shepherd would be there defending them. Sometimes, however, sheep need protection not just from predators, but also from themselves. Sheep, as we've said, that end up upside down, they need hauled up the right way. Sheep that get stuck in thorn bushes by their fleece need hauled out of the thorn bushes. Sheep that end up on the edges of ravines and halfway up cliffs need rescued. And sheep that wander from the flock need brought back, because being on your own is the most dangerous situation that you can be in if you are a flock or a herd animal. And this is where the shepherd's staff came into play. So that big stick with the hook on top would be used to drag a sheep upright, or to pull it out of the thorn bushes, or to bring it back to the flock, or to rescue it from the edge of a cliff, or from wherever it was getting itself into danger. And in the same way, we, like sheep, need protection. We need protection from our enemy, who is the devil, Satan. And we also need protection from ourselves at times, from the temptation to wander off, from the temptation to go the wrong way or to get involved in the wrong thing. Left to our own devices, we are completely incapable. But we're not left to our own devices. We have a good shepherd to watch over us. And Jesus, as the good shepherd, of course, laid down his life for his sheep at the cross, and even after that would not leave us on our own, sending the Holy Spirit to help us in that battle that we have ongoing against temptation. Oh, there's the shepherd. The final metaphor, or the way that this metaphor speaks to us, is of the shepherd's great care for the sheep. So the shepherd would put oil on the sheep to keep away the insect pests. The shepherd would tend to an injured sheep and would even carry a sheep that was weak or too injured to walk with the flock. The shepherd was the one who would go looking when a sheep had strayed away and was lost, because he knew them all as individuals and would know when one was missing. With all of that attention that was paid to the flock, it is not surprising then that the sheep came to know and to trust their shepherd and would follow without question wherever the shepherd would lead. Now, this imagery that we have of the shepherd and the sheep was something that the people of Israel could relate to because it was part of their lifestyles. But I think today it is still something that we can relate to. It speaks to us, as it spoke to them, of our relationship with God and our dependence on him as our provider, as our defender, as our protector, as the one who cares for and knows us and abides with us. Just as the sheep would trust and follow the shepherd without question, this then is our appropriate response to God as we recognise him as our good shepherd. Now we know that God saw shepherding as a good model for leadership. We know this because the two greatest leaders in the Old Testament were both from shepherding backgrounds. Moses was a shepherd who cared for his father-in-law's flocks for many years. And King David, he didn't come from royal stock. He wasn't raised as a little prince in the royal family. He was out on the hillsides taking care of his father's flocks. Not only do we find these examples of shepherds among the great leaders in the Bible, but repeatedly throughout both the Old and the New Testament, God's chosen leaders are repeatedly called upon to shepherd the flock. And we saw that last week when we learned about Peter and Jesus restoring Peter, and he called him to feed my lambs and to take care of my sheep, and on the third instance to feed my sheep. And we're going to hear about it again next week when we look at some of the words of God through the prophet Jeremiah, who says to the leaders of his people, "Woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture." So everything that we have talked about this morning concerning the relationship of the shepherd and the sheep is what God desires for us. As sheep, we are to be fully dependent on him to lead us. And we can do that because we know that he is worthy to lead us, because he laid down his life for us. And we know that he will lead us safely home. Now, without a shepherd, sheep can at times do some crazy things. Sheep are a flock animal, a herd animal, and they like to follow. And there's a report that came out of Turkey in 2005, which concerned 1,500 sheep, 1,500 sheep, who all mysteriously leapt to their deaths over the side of a cliff. Eyewitnesses to that account described it as looking at a waterfall coming over the side of this ravine. In the end, 450 of those sheep died. The rest survived only because they landed on a great big woolly heap below them and their fall was broken. Apparently, the shepherds of those sheep had left them to graze while they had gone off to have breakfast together. And experts believe that what happened next was that one of the sheep either got too close to the edge and slipped off, or it seriously overestimated its ability to jump across the ravine. Sadly, it is believed that the sheep that did that was the lead sheep in the flock. And so all the others followed. One after another, they followed until there was this great white woolly waterfall flowing down the side of that ravine. All of us, like sheep, are following someone or something. Some of us follow the latest trends. Some of us are following what our parents did, for better or for worse. Some of us are following leaders who aren't able to even shepherd themselves, let alone to shepherd other people. And some of us are just following the crowd. No one is deliberately or intentionally trying to seek their own destruction, any more than those 1,500 sheep were deliberately trying to bring their lives to an end, jumping over the side of that ravine. Only the Good Shepherd, Jesus, in whom this name, Yahweh-Rohi, finds its fulfillment, only he is able to tend the human soul and to lead each one safely home. He alone is worthy of our trust. Now, King David grew up, as I've said, as a boy out on the hillsides. It was King David who tended the sheep. It was him, before he was a king, who found pasture for them, who found water for them, who tended to their wounds, who put oil on their wool to keep the insects out, who protected them when predators came, who defended them and who would put himself between them and danger. He was there when the new lambs were born. He was there when the older sheep passed away. He knew each one as an individual. And as he reflected on his first-hand experience in dealing with sheep, in being their shepherd, this name, Yahweh-Rohi, the Lord is my shepherd, came to him, and he penned that most beautiful psalm that we know as the 23rd Psalm. It has endured throughout time and been a source of encouragement to many over the years. May it speak to each one of us anew on this day. Amen. Good Shepherd of the sheep, this day we commit ourselves again to following where you will lead. There is much in this world that seeks to clamour for our attention. There is much that seeks to distract us and take us off the path that you are leading us on. But this day we choose you because you are worthy. You laid down your life for us. You abide with us. You care for us. And so we put our faith in you, knowing that you have only good in mind for us and that you will lead us, each one, safely home. Amen.